This BizNews Briefing is brought to you by Investec Business Banking. Make the move from business as usual to Investec Business Banking.
It's Thursday, the 1st of May. This is your BizNews Briefing. I'm Bronwyn Nielsen. In today's show, we hear from Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, Fikile Mbalula, Helen Zille, and political scientist Dr. Frans Cronje. First up, we have a new date for the South African budget. Let's take a listen.
The challenges ahead are serious but not insurmountable. If we work together, stay focused, and persevere, we can chart a better course for our economy and our people. That is my commitment to South Africans, and that is what we aim to achieve when we table the new budget on the 21st of May 2025.
ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula also held a press briefing yesterday. Let's dip into the question and answer section of that press briefing, where he starts by addressing calls for the finance minister to resign.
Ministers resign for committing major things. And I will ask a question: what did the Minister of Finance commit? Except the fact that the proposals that he brought to the fore were disputed, particularly around the VAT increase. And if you were to debate the budget in totality, you will realize that it's a good budget. And the minister was able to go backwards and actually do the right thing in terms of the processes that were actually followed. We are not going to have a situation, as much as it is the president's prerogative to have a weekend special again in our country. We are stabilizing the country, and at the same time, we will take cogent and informed decisions. It can't be when we are faced with a big challenge like the budget debacle and impasse, the first resolution is to dismiss the minister. And those who are doing so and calling for the minister to go is political posturing. The same as the question of going to court was completely unnecessary, because all matters could have been settled outside court. And the question we ask to the DA is that, how are you going to contend with the budget that you are in government that you did not support if the budget were to be implemented? Of course, it will call into question morally their continued participation in the GNU, because you can't be in the GNU to support a budget that you don't agree with. To us, it's not a make or break, it's a principled question that any political party that participates in the GNU will have to answer. The ANC is not in a hurry to dismiss people from the GNU, neither are we afraid about their presence. And we have never distorted nor seek to sugarcoat what GNU is. GNU is not a melting pot of political parties. It will continue to have these features of parties who are within it but disagree on policy issues, and that includes the DA. They'll continue to push for that. Even if you replace the DA, doesn't mean that the replacement is going to be aligned to the ANC. Those political parties are opposed to us. And then it doesn't mean that if you were to say go away and then the other party must come in, you can call them by names. They are not going to come there and change their identity and become African National Congress. Except one party that claims that it is ANC. It is on the path of winning back the ANC through the back door, led by one old man in this country. But the rest are not sharing the same perspective with the ANC. You say that the minister caused a mess. He didn't cause a mess. We went, for the first time, I went with Mahlenge to Parliament, and we were told right on the doorstep, like all of you, that the budget has been postponed because we need more time to negotiate and to engage with the budget. And the minister was ready to present the budget, and so that had to be reversed.
Last night, I caught up with Helen Zille, chair of the DA Federal Council, who says that there's still much work to do before the 21st of May, but she feels that the finance minister is fully committed to the process this time around.
Well, there's a lot of work to do. The first thing is that the finance minister was banking on the VAT increase to bring in 75 billion rand, and of course that won't come in now. And being able to do a proper spending review is challenging. It takes quite a while, and we have to look at programs and projects that aren't adding value. We've looked, for example, at the sector education and training authorities, but they're creatures of legislation. And so to undo things like that takes a long time and a lot of due process. So we're going to have to look at where we can trim the fat. And I know that Minister Godongwana is very committed to negotiating this budget. Part of the problem of the last budget was that he was not at all willing to negotiate the budget. His mind seems to have changed on this thing totally, and we have had some good discussions so far as to how to proceed.
There are those calling for the finance minister to resign. Do you think that's extreme?
Well, you know, the most important question in politics is always compared to what? I know that Julius Malema wanted Floyd Shivambu once upon a time to be the finance minister. And one thing that Minister Godongwana does understand is the need for growth and jobs. And that is extraordinarily important in our country because growth doesn't just happen. No one is compelled to invest in South Africa. The conditions have to be right for people to want to invest in South Africa. And Minister Godongwana understands that as well as anybody in the ANC, and that's a big plus in his favor.
Helen, I've just been listening today, being the 30th of April, to Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, giving a press statement. And in that press statement, he does say that a fundamental error that the DA committed was going to court on this matter. How do you feel about that?
Well, if it wasn't for our court case, you would have had a VAT increase on the 1st of May. It's as simple as that. And let me explain to Fikile Mbalula why. The minister announced that there would be a VAT increase. It was included in the fiscal framework. In the portfolio on the 1st of April, the ANC, along with smaller parties such as RISE, BOSA, Action South Africa, etc., voted the fiscal framework through using a completely incorrect process, but they voted it through. Then it went to Parliament, and Action South Africa, RISE, BOSA, and all the smaller parties, including the IFP and others, helped the ANC to get the fiscal framework through Parliament. Now, once the fiscal framework is through Parliament, which happened on the 2nd of April, only two things can stop the VAT hike going through. One is a court order, which is what we got, which is why there won't be a VAT hike. And the other would have been a new fiscal framework that went through the same process as the old one, which would have been impossible to get through by the 1st of May. So if it wasn't for our court case, there would be a VAT increase on the 1st of May.
Talk to me about 6 months, 12 months out, and South Africa as you see it, with a sturdy government of national unity at the helm.
Well, a week is a long time in politics, as the famous saying goes. So you never know what's going to happen next. This is going to be a very, very unusual coalition. If any of the things that have happened in the past 6 months had happened in any normal European coalition, the government would have fallen instantly. But South Africa is a different kettle of fish. We can take each other head on within the government of national unity and survive. And that's a very interesting feature of South Africa. Every time we have a head-on clash, people would say, well, the government is falling. Not in South Africa. We're a bit more robust and a bit more sturdy than that. Now, that is not to say that there won't become an issue that makes it impossible for us to stay in the GNU. But all our polling tells us that the GNU is enormously popular and very much supported across the board. And for as long as that remains, we will continue fighting and standing up for our voters and remain in the GNU until it becomes impossible for us to stand up for our voters in the GNU. So we will stand up for our voters. But we can only do that because we have enough support and enough votes to hold the balance of power. So that means we can bring the government down if we withdraw. The smaller parties are all there by grace and favor of the ANC. Cyril could fire them tomorrow and it would make no difference at all. That explains why they are so quick to please the ANC, where we don't have to. We are there because of the voters, not by grace and favor of an appointment by the president.
That full interview with Helen is available on BizNews TV on the YouTube platform. This morning, Alec Hogg spoke to political scientist Dr. Frans Cronier, who says that in the early days of the GNU, the DA behaved as the ANC's guest. But this VAT victory signals a real change in the working of the GNU, and the DA is now firmly in play, having clearly proved its mettle.
What is, I've thought, incredibly important is how the power balance has been altered in the minds of people. Because once you climb down once on something, you know, it can easily become a habit. And I think what the ANC might have done through its blundering is to train the DA to be strong. You know, early in the GNU, my sense of it was that the DA came across sometimes a bit like a guest in the ANC's house. You know, they'd gone into government and was all sort of new. And that, as it must be, I suppose. But now, no longer. Now the DA has employed power, real power. We talk of ruthlessness. This was ruthless and brilliant by whoever the DA strategists behind this were. And I think once you've done that once or twice, you probably quite enjoyed the sensation, and you're going to do it again. And your ANC colleagues know this. And therefore, this VAT climb down from a political perspective was as significant an event and changes the balance in the country to the same extent, or an equivalent extent to the 40% loss that the ANC suffered last year. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think trust is less important than the ability to make your partner in government understand that you have the ability to be ruthless, and that therefore when we talk, we better come to terms quickly, because if not, we are prepared to force consequences. And my little impression of one of the reasons why the ANC folded was they looked at the alternative GNU option. So without the DA, with the DA, the National Assembly's got 287 seats. Without it, without the DA, the GNU is 200. If the Freedom Front left, it would have 194. Mashaba comes in, 200, and one or two others. You get about a 202 alternative GNU. But at 202, the ANC understood that you've now got 4 or 5 parties with the ability to collapse the government. So you've got 4 or 5 guns to your head. And some of those parties are very wild, a bit unstable. And have you really improved your position now? Whereas at 287, the government only collapses with the agreement of the DA, which is much more serious and has vast numbers of supporters to take into consideration. And so the early kind of bravado of kick out the DA, they don't matter, we won't be dictated to. I think the understanding became that if we trade from 287 to 202, we're putting ourselves in a horrible position, much more dangerous position than we were. And if we boot the DA out, more than that, there's the prospect of a vote of no confidence in Mr. Ramaphosa.
At Sun Exchange, we make going solar simple, profitable, and completely risk-free. Join over 100 satisfied South African customers already enjoying the benefits of risk-free solar. Start saving today. Visit sunexchange.com and join the solar revolution.
In the world of business banking, the bottom line can often triumph over relationships. At Investec, we value both. Make the move from business as usual to Investec Business Banking. Out of the ordinary.
That full interview with Dr. Frans Cronje is also available on BizNews TV on the YouTube platform. Turning our attention to the markets, Daniel Morgan, Senior Portfolio Manager at Synovus Trust, says Microsoft reported stronger than expected quarterly sales and profit growth, with total revenue increasing 13% to $70.1 billion and adjusted profit at $3.46 a share.
It seems like there's a lot to like in this report. I'm going to start, given that, I'm like a perpetual pessimist, I'm going to start with the glass half empty scenario. Was there anything in here you didn't like?
Romain, going across, you mentioned revenue and EPS both beat. They also beat on commercial cloud. They beat on intelligent cloud. Really, you look across the board, productivity and business, they beat. There really isn't any segment data here where I see a miss. Azer was at 33%. Street was looking for 31 to 32. The big number, Romain, is what you've already kind of alluded to, I believe, and I haven't had a chance to check it because I'm in the studio, but we need that guide for fourth quarter on Azer, and the consensus is 29%. Everyone's worried, right, because of what happened with GCP missing. And obviously we roll now into Azer and AWS tomorrow, is that we're starting to see some sort of slowdown in terms of data center spend rates. And so that's the key guide number, that fourth quarter Azer growth rate.
Well, that's what I'm curious about, too, because, the numbers, at least for the quarter past, held up. But then, like I said, with the warning from Supermicro last night, we just got Confluent earnings just a little while ago today, also all seeming to suggest that maybe there is softness in that space. Of course, Supermicro isn't Microsoft. Confluent isn't Microsoft. Can they weather this storm?
Romain, Microsoft's in a very unique position because, as you know, they have grown their top-line revenue growth 8 consecutive years plus 10%. They are the behemoth in the enterprise software space, right? Next to Oracle. Those are the two really big companies. So I think they're in a much better position than, let's say, other companies like the chip companies, NVIDIA, we're going to talk about a month from now, other stocks like, PCs, smartphones, where you really get that heavy black cloud surrounding the tariffs, where really Microsoft, other than in data center, maybe component costs in terms of their servers, but, and potential slowdown related to slowdown in GDP in terms of IT spending, but, they're not as subject to all the worries that we have in the tech space.
Staying with company news, Shweta Kajuria, the managing director at Wolf Research, comments on Meta's better than expected first quarter earnings. Here are our colleagues at Bloomberg with the details.
I do want to start with ad sales because those were phenomenal again, as they have been in the past, despite a lot of proselytizations that somehow this was all coming to an end. Were you pleased with this report in its totality?
Absolutely. We think so. First of all, thanks for having me. But yeah, absolutely. In terms of Q1, I would say based on what Google had printed and even Snapchat, even though we don't view Snapchat as a big read-through for Meta, and also large agency holding companies from Publicis to Group M, seemed like the first quarter for advertising was going to be largely fine. It was more about the second quarter guide. So the big takeaway here is the second quarter guide came in much better than feared. We were hearing at the high end, investors were expecting up to $44 billion in revenue, and it came in above those expectations. And also on OPEX, actually a positive that OPEX guidance was lowered by $1 billion. We actually would not be surprised if they lowered through the year. That's something that this management team has done before. And then on CapEx, that's a modest negative. So we'll be waiting to hear what they have to say, especially after Google reiterated their guide and Amazon is expected to reiterate their full year guide tomorrow.
So when it comes to the ad side of the business, though, too, I thought it was interesting. The average price per ad, that was up as was expected and above analyst estimates. I think it was up 10%. Street was looking for something like 7. Though ad impressions did miss. And I'm wondering, does that matter? I mean, it was up 5 versus 20 year over year. And I think the Street was looking for something like 7. Complicating or not?
I don't think it is a huge negative per se, in part because they will have other impressions and other surfaces that will grow. It's going to be a mix of both pricing as well as impression. And pricing, I would say, is kind of an output. But what is remarkable is actually that it is 10% growth in pricing, even when in 2024 we saw pretty elevated pricing level just because they've done so many product changes. So what it tells us is that there is demand for the platform, i.e. there is ROAS for advertisers, otherwise pricing wouldn't be this elevated, would not have grown 10%.
On the sporting front, rugby journalist Tim Cocker and BizNews Rugby insider Rory Stain discuss calls to restructure the rugby calendar to better accommodate players and fans alike. Let's dip into that conversation.
So at some point, one turkey has to vote for Christmas in order to sort this season out. I mean, Ruan Erasmus has actually came up with a brilliant idea. I think we've touched on it briefly before, where the Rugby Championship happens at the same time as the Six Nations through February and March to kind of bring those in line and therefore open up possibilities in the calendar elsewhere. And so, yeah, once again, it's left to people like Ruan Erasmus to kind of come up with the innovation and solve the potential issues that rugby has got many of. But actually, whether the guys in blazers, the old farts, whether they actually pull their finger out and do it, that's another question.
Yeah. And to my mind, that is a no-brainer that the Rugby Championship overlaps with the Six Nations. Even if you push the Six Nations maybe 2 weeks later, make it kind of not quite start in the last week of January and into early February, but make it start mid-February and push it along a little bit to accommodate the slow startup in the Southern Hemisphere. I think that must happen at some point, Tim, as you say, just to free up, because South African players, like we said last time, are basically playing a 12-month season, and that's never going to, there's no longevity or what's the politically correct word that everybody always talks about when they talk about playing? Sustainability. Thank you, sir.
And I'm interested actually in what the mindset is in South Africa towards because we're used to it up north, whereas it must be strange for South African rugby fans to kind of follow this hopping around competition to competition. One goes away for a month and then comes back.
It's so difficult for us, Tim. It's so foreign to be playing rugby in the heat of a summer when we normally at cricket games and the whole of the country's on leave, as you know. South Africa starts shutting down somewhere in the 2nd or 3rd week of November, and then we're into summer and we have our Christmas holidays. And as I say, that's always cricket season, and then into, the schools and the universities reopening in January and February. But to be playing rugby through that time is so foreign. And we are already only now coming to grips with this URC format. We have yet to come to grips with the EPCR and the Investec Champions Cup and thrown all of that in there. So, I mean, if there's a time to introduce a global season and coincide the Rugby Championship with the Six Nations, then let's do it now while we still got our heads actually focused on, okay, the rugby landscape is all new. So if you're going to make changes, make them now.
That brings us to the end of this BizNews briefing. Thanks as always for watching. We'll be back on Monday with more context, both local and global.
This BizNews briefing is brought to you by Investec Business Banking. Make the move to private banking service now for your business.